Good morning. We are continuing our new series that we've been in, exploring the book of James, essential teachings for every Christian. And James does an incredible job of being able to share with us in some very practical ways these teachings that impact our lives on a day in and day out basis. And these teachings are kind of built upon the premise of wanting to have followers of Jesus learn to be able to fully experience the life that God has created us to live. And so we're going to continue with those teachings this morning. And last week we ran out of time finishing up the James chapter 1, verses 13 to 18, which is not necessarily unusual for me to not make it all the way through my sermon, as many of you probably know. And so this morning I'd like to close out that kind of what I didn't finish last Sunday in verses 13 to 18. And I'm going to continue on and moving into some other areas from 19 to 27. And so what this actually means is that the sermon today is going to be, it's going to be basically three distinct application areas. And so it's kind of like I put down here, it's kind of like a cafeteria style. Which is a little unusual for me to kind of preach that way. I typically try to preach around one kind of main idea. But this morning, as I work through the text, there seems to be these three distinct kind of teachings that we're going to look at this morning. And I'll try to get through all three of them. If I don't get into the third one, I'll just carry it over to next week, and we'll kind of take it from there. So, but anyway, that's the plan, so you at least kind of know where we're going. And so my hope is that the Spirit of God would challenge you and encourage you in maybe one of these areas this morning that might be unique to your situation. And so to start, I want to look at James chapter 1, verses 13 to 18. And this is, James is shifting his teaching here from talking about trials, and we talked about that last week, and you can go and listen online or download the podcast if you didn't get a chance to hear the sermon. I'm not going to rehash that this morning, but he's moving from talking about trials to talking about temptation. And so we're going to look specifically at verses 13 to 18 as in terms of what James says about temptation. So let me read these verses. All right, you can look at them on your screen, or you can look at them on your phone or in your Bible if you'd like to. Verses 13 to 18 of chapter 1 of James. It says here, "When tempted, no one should say, 'God is tempting me.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all that he created." And so James talks very practically here. This is what's so beautiful about the book of James, is that teachings are so incredibly practical to our lives. And so he's talking about temptation, and he tells us that temptation is not from God, that God doesn't tempt us. Temptation actually comes as a result. The reason why we are tempted comes as a result of sin's nature in us longing for something different. It's something that we can't escape. It's inbred into our inherent nature as individuals, that we're going to be tempted towards certain things that I would say things that lead us to death as opposed to lead us to life. And so temptation is common to the human experience. You shouldn't think that if you're being tempted that somehow you're bad, or that you're something unique, or that God is displeased or upset with you because you're being tempted. That's a common human experience. In actuality, if you know anything about the life of Jesus, actually Jesus, who actually could not sin, was actually tempted, right? And Jesus, again, is a model, a prototype of the second Adam, or the second Eve. Like, he's a prototype of what true humanity is supposed to look like. So even in true humanity's reality, in terms of what Jesus showed us, he still experienced temptation because of sin's destructive influence across the world. That's a whole other theology on sin that we could talk about. But that's not for the sermon this morning. So James makes it clear that temptation is not the same as sinful action. And so he says that sin occurs after the temptation or the desire is conceived, right, is given birth to, conceived, giving birth to in our hearts, and begins to mature and to grow in us, right? Think of conception. That's what's happening at the point of conception. When a baby is conceived, life begins and growth immediately starts, right? And so James uses that analogy, that sin is the conception or the conceiving of that sinful desire, beginning to act on it, allowing it to grow. And this sin is something that develops in us, is something that leads to death. Not only physical death, but death in our day in and day out experience. As many of us can attest to, when we are engaged in sinful activity in our lives, it may feel right or feel good for a time, but inevitably we begin to realize that this is actually leading me to slavery. It's leading me to torture. It's leading me to death, not to life. But I love how James draws these transitions, because it seems as though he's trying to develop a new train of thought when he goes to verse 16. Because he says, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights." So you might initially read that and think, oh, he's trying to focus you away from sin and focus on God's gifts instead, right? God has given you good gifts, so don't give yourself to sinful activities. Give yourself to good gifts that God has given you, which is in many ways kind of, yeah, that's part of what I think James is getting at here. But James, I think, is more concretely pointing out the source of many of our temptations and sins. The source of our temptation and sin comes from God's good and perfect gifts. Do you get that? The sin is a misuse of the good gifts of God. This maybe wrecks with your theology about thinking about God. If you were with us back in our Good and Beautiful God series, like we reconstructed the truth about who God is, that God is a good, holy, loving God. He is not a God who looks to lash out judgments on us. He is not a God who looks for us to perform in certain ways and then withholds his love for us if we don't achieve some sort of standard. His nature is good. His nature is love. His nature is generosity. And so all that he has created is a gift to us. It is a gift that has been given by God. It's hard to really think. I want you to try to think with me for a moment. It's hard to kind of think about things in their natural state that are inherently sinful. Right? I want you to think a little bit with me on that. Now, we could obviously say that drugs are bad and sinful, but a lot of times that's as a result of humans' inception and manufacturing and synthetically and doing all kinds of things to create something that's outside of whatever God designed. You can look at money. Money is not an evil thing, but it certainly is a major way that hinders us in our walk with God and can become a sinful reality for us if it's being misused. Same as with possessions. Same as with food. We could go on and on and on. God has blessed us with many good things, many gifts. He's a good God, but the sin is the misuse or the hoarding of or the worshiping of those gifts. I like the word even hoarding, because the Bible speaks a ton about God's blessing that was given to the people of Israel. He blessed them in some very tangible ways. He blessed them with lots of cattle and land, and there was a lot of material goods that they received. And the main judgment against them, the ways in which they had sinned against God, was that they had hoarded for themselves the things that God gave them. And they had neglected the poor. The rich had become richer and the poor had become poor. And God said, that's a misuse of my gift. My gifts were given so that those who have more can give to those who have little. Doesn't fit very well in our economic capitalistic situation today and as Americans in terms of how we think about money and finances. Jesus would have some very interesting things to say to us today in our country about how we handle money, how we pursue wealth, how we care for the poor. And so this understanding that God gives us good gifts can carry the implication that in many ways everything can be good for us, while at the same time everything can be evil for us as well. Because it many times has to do with the misuse of it, or the use of it to honor or to dishonor God. You can be a multimillionaire and still have God's love and blessing and God's favor upon you, because your use of that, you're not controlled by those funds, right? That's hard to make a judgment on that sort of thing. It's between that and that person. But how are they recognizing that the funds they have are intended to be used for others, as for the sake of others, as opposed to themselves? And so they give away, or they're very generous with how they operate and live their lives, et cetera, et cetera. So does the gift point us to God and to surrender to Him? Or does the gift become something we attach our identity to and something that we worship? Right? So I think that's what James is trying to get at here when he talks about temptation. Don't be deceived to think that you're just thinking about certain things that are blacklisted that you're not supposed to do. James is saying, be aware of the good gifts that God has given you in your life, because those things are the things that can lead you to sin. Okay? You will be tempted to do certain things with your possessions and with your money and with your time. How you care for your body or not. Your body is a temple. It's a gift, right? Each of our bodies are gifts. And so God wants us to be able to give Him back what He has already given to us, to be used by Him and to be used to benefit other people. So it's a key point to understand. How, when you think about your own life, are there places in your own life that you think about where I'm experiencing temptation, or I find myself prone to go away, act in a sinful way towards something, or to do something that I know God would say is wrong? How closely tied to that is a gift that God has given you? Something that He has blessed you with. And so we have to be aware of idolizing God's gifts, because our sinful nature wants to worship them, wants to worship the gifts other than the giver of the gifts. All that God has given us is intended to bless us and to point us back to Him. That's really important to understand, friends. Everything that God gives us is intended to bless us and to point us back to Him as the source. Our problem comes into play when we begin to internalize, we begin to worship, we find our identity in those things as opposed to God. We hoard, we keep. So I want to encourage you to think about that in the context of your own life. Where are the areas that you are quickly led towards temptation? What are the things where you find maybe sinful patterns in your life that develop? You probably can find a very clear connection to a gift, something God has blessed you with. It's to be seen as a gift. That's why they talk a lot about I'm kind of going off topic here for a moment, but and I'm not a trained addict counselor, or I've not been through Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any of those things. But I know that one of the main things in that process is that you can get somebody clean through detox, right? That's happened countless times. But unless some interior work is being done under the surface to help heal and to make right what's going on beneath the surface that's leading to the expression toward the addiction, right? Then the detox is only a Band-Aid for a while. That person will eventually go back to the alcohol or the drugs or whatever it may be, because the main issue of the matter is not being addressed internally. What needs to be healed here? And so if this gets healed here, then there's great opportunities, right, for health and success moving forward. Detox actually works. We can stay clean. All right. Let me transition now so that's the temptation segment I wanted to leave you with this morning, that kind of was the back end of what the message was last week. I want to jump forward now and move into the second segment, which is found in James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. And I want you to go ahead and look along or listen to these verses. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So now as human beings, we don't do a very good job of this with this teaching in general as humans, right? And I would venture to say that none of us would raise our hands in this room and say, I got this one figured out pretty well, right? Probably not. So we struggle with this as human beings, right? We know it internally for ourselves. We know it in the culture that we live in. If you want evidence of this, just turn on your favorite cable news network, no matter what time of day, no matter what network you like to watch or listen to, and watch the anchors and the panelists argue, fight, and talk over each other, forcing their points and views on each other related to the political topics of the day. I don't care where. Go to CNN, go to MSNBC, go to Fox News, go to any of them, and just watch it happen. Watch the fighting, the arguing, the back and forth, forcing opinions and ideas back and forth on each other. And so this is something that is just a part of our society. We struggle with it. Think about this in the context of yourself. Do you find it easy to be quick to listen and learn from a divergent opinion or way of thinking that's different than your own? Is that maybe for some of us, that's a natural, easy thing. Well, I venture to say probably for many of us, that's a hard thing to do. To be quick to listen and to learn from a divergent opinion. Because many of us already have a lot of times our minds made up about our ideas and opinions. Do you find it easy to withhold the sharing of your views and opinions politically when other people are sharing theirs? Politics is a huge hot topic. It always has been. It is a huge divisive issue in the church, actually, as well. A massively divisive issue. Do you find it easy to stay calm and loving when confronted with different beliefs and ideas that actually challenge your own? Right? This is hard for all of us. Some of you, if your temperament is more easygoing, that may be a lot easier for you to do. For others, it may be incredibly difficult. Because of sin's inherent nature, humans tend to orient themselves around self-preservation and self-orientation. That's how we operate as people. That's because of sin. We find our identity a lot of times in our views and our ideas, and we fight and we argue even when those ideas are challenged. And many times it's because we see the idea that's challenging to ours as sometimes an attack on our identity. We begin to feel like we're losing control, or maybe I wasn't right about this after all. And so that breeds this sense of disconnect internally, and because we've attached a value to that for our internal structure, that we think that this is a part of who I am. And so when it's challenged, it causes us to fight or react. God didn't create us to live this way. We were created to live in the way James communicates here. We were created to live to be people who are quick to listen. People that are slow to speak. People that are slow to become angry. You know this to be true. If you think about this logically and rationally, you know that this teaching makes sense. And it brings life instead of death. Let me explain. What is it? Why is the issue or the principle to be quick to listen, why is it a valuable principle to live by? Well, for one, it shows the love and the value of the other person to be heard and understood. You ever think about that? Before you blurt out your opinion and idea, that being quick to listen actually takes the focus off of yourself for a while and says, no, I'm going to withhold saying anything so that I can express and show value and love to the person sharing. This is their turn to talk and to share what's important to them. But a lot of times we feel the compulsion to jump in with an idea or to clarify or whatever. we have a hard time just shutting up and just letting people speak and listening and giving value to them as people. We may not agree with everything that's being said. We don't have to, right? But where's the show of love and value towards that person and expressing their opinion? That can be a valuable principle, why it's important to be quick to listen, for the benefits that it brings upon the other person sharing, that they feel loved and valued in the process. I think it's also important to be quick to listen because it shows a learning posture. This is very important. It shows a learning posture. It shows that as people, we want to be learners, not experts. Does anybody want to be an expert here? Right? We're prone toward that. For some reason, we feel like we're obligated or we need to have expert status in things, probably because we attach our identity to that, to be honest, which is an unhealthy attachment in our lives. But being quick to listen shows a heart attitude of a learning posture. I remember doing a mission trip several years back to New Orleans. And I was able to serve in a predominantly African-American area in the just south of the Superdome in New Orleans. This was several years after Katrina, and our church youth group went, and we partnered with a group called Urban Impact Ministries that was doing some great work in the South New Orleans area, which is just dealing with lots of poverty and crime. And this is a church in that area that is being the hands and feet of Jesus in the midst of the projects, a lot of variety of racial tensions. And we were able to go and partner. And of course, I was raised and I'm a white person, right? So I was raised and grew up essentially in a white subculture, and kind of adopted certain political views based on my parents, and so, but I've always kind of prided myself on being open-minded to want to learn from other people. And so one of the great things that I was really intrigued by in going to New Orleans was, here's a church, predominantly African American, that's working in this particular neighborhood, in this area of New Orleans, that so many people have kind of written off. And I want to learn. I want to be a part of what they're doing, and I want to learn from my brothers and sisters, and in a different context there. And I got to know the guys that I work with so well. We wrote a rap together. Actually, I should probably show that to you sometime. I actually composed and wrote a rap, if you can believe it, and I have it on video. That would be a great thing to do, I guess, sometime. But the point, let's get to the point. No, I don't have it ready to go now. Sorry, Donnie. So, the point being that I didn't quite understand from a political understanding. I grew up in this very conservative understanding politically, and I respect those here that have very conservative politics. And yet I was going and serving with my brothers and sisters in New Orleans in a predominantly African-American community. And it was very understood that many in that community were very strong Democratic political supporters. And so I was always just curious, like, how do you wrestle or deal with the morality issues that conservatives hold so highly? You know, and these are friends that I developed, and they looked at me and talked with me about some things, and they said, you know, those morality issues are still important to people of color in these communities. But they said, but the Democratic Party has been more closely aligned with supporting and developing things that help deal with others in our context, in our situation. And so we find that the social implications of the party tend to be more aligned with the realities that we're experiencing, notwithstanding the moral stuff. And it was so there's a lot of different understandings out there, right? So I don't want to make this a political message, but the point was that I was able to go into that experience and learn, and it was eye-opening to me to be able to understand now. It's like, oh, this makes more sense. Like, now I understand why some Christians are more conservative in their political orientation and why some Christians are more liberal in their political orientation. It makes sense instead of demonizing each other, right? Which is often what we do. Like, fight with each other over it and point fingers and say, well, you're a worse or a better Christian than this person because you voted for that candidate or that candidate, which is divisive, right? Just kills us. So, the point being that we need to develop, being quick to listen shows a heart of wanting to learn, that we don't know it all. As I like to tell Cheryl, and I try to tell my kids, and this is really something to tell myself because I'm a highly opinionated person. But here's the deal. As I always say, yeah, I know. There are always two sides to every topic, every issue. Always. There's always another side of the story you don't see. We look at everything through a rose-colored black or white glasses on everything, and some things are very clear black and white. But I will tell you, most things are very gray in this world that we live in. There are multiple angles for why people do what they do. And this has to be true in a lot of different ways. When you make a judgment or a rationalization on what you see somebody do, you automatically jump towards an opinion that you already have about that as opposed to learning about what might be going on the other side of the issue. If you go into things being more of a learner, there's more grace that's given. You look at people more with a care and a love and a value for who they are, right? Instead of trying to get it over on them in terms of having a better idea or having a power structure put in place where you're right and I'm wrong type of thing. So anyway, being quick to listen, it helps us not only show value to people, but it helps us to develop a learning posture, which is so important, friends. To be learners, lifelong learners. And I would encourage you to be lifelong learners in opinions that are divergent than what you hold so dearly. Try to understand why other religious systems believe the way that they do. Try to understand why a political party or a political viewpoint sees things different than the way that you do. Try to go into it with an open-mindedness to try to understand what might be motivating that. Try to get a full understanding of the whole things involved. Doesn't mean you're going to maybe lose your view, but it certainly will help you gain more respect for other people who think differently, because it makes sense. I see this in the church all the time. I've been in lots of churches in my 30 years of ministry experience, and lots of different philosophical and theological ideas out there. I sit and I talk to Jesus-loving, Spirit-filled people that will tell me the sky is purple, right? And I'm like, oh, it looks blue. Right? But I'm able to see the Spirit of God working, and it teaches me in the lives of people that I see, what do I need to learn? How do I need to see things differently here? Maybe I'm missing something. So there's a value in learning, a learning posture. This is why it's important to be quick to listen. I didn't say it's easy. It's hard. The next one fits into this, slow to speak. Why is this a valuable principle to live by? Well, for one, it kind of piggybacks on the quick to listen part, but to make sure that we have truly listened and learned from the other person. When you're slow to speak, you've given time to really digest what you've just taken in. This might involve, clarifying questions about what was said to make sure that we understand things correctly. Right, so that our responses are true to the right understanding of the issue. It's kind of known as active listening. How many of you have listened to somebody say something and been quick to formulate very quickly? The human brain's so fast, right? Formulate an opinion and respond to it and didn't even actually hear what the real problem was or the issue was that was being brought up. I don't know. It happens to me all the time, right? So being slow to speak allows me to and allows us to clarify. Is this what you're saying? I think I heard you say this. Is that right? Yes. Or no, you missed it entirely. I didn't even use those words, Darren. Where'd you come up with those words? Okay, rewind back, right? Say it again, right? So this idea of trying to understand where people are coming from. The second reason why it's a valuable principle to live by is because it gives us time to think before we speak. So often we can blurt out ideas or opinions that might not be received well or that can be hurtful to others. And so being slow to speak gives us pause to choose our words wisely. Does anybody else struggle with that? How many, don't raise your hand, right? Unless you want to. How many of you got this figured out, right? Put your hand down, Carrie. You don't have this figured out. Lots of love, Carrie. Just messing with you. How many times do we deal with this as people? Where we find that I just did it there with Carrie too, actually. You notice that? Quick to speak. I lost my train of thought, totally lost it. That's okay. No, you're okay. It's a valuable principle to live by. It gives us time to really evaluate what we're going to say before we say it. I saw a Facebook post this past week, not from anybody here at Mission Springs, but another church in the area, where somebody posted on their Facebook page a picture of somebody preaching in a church service. And the caption said, "The sermon really sucked today." You were blessed if you weren't there. Right? I'm serious. What? Come on, really? You may think the sermon sucks today, that's fine. But we're, right, publicizing that through social media to the whole, talk about wanting to brand yourself in a negative way. That's the way to do it, right? It's not how we treat each other. That's not how we treat people. If we're slow to speak, we recognize, hey, I didn't particularly care for the sermon today. That's fine. A, it ain't about me. B, maybe somebody else was blessed by it, so I should be thankful for that. And C, I can hold my opinions to myself and I don't have to share it with the whole natural world, right? So it's valuable. A valuable principle, being slow to speak. And the last principle here is slow to become angry. And so why is this a valuable principle? Well, anger leads us to death instead of to life. How alive do you truly feel when you're angry? Right? Come on. When you're really upset, isn't that the most wonderful experience you've ever had? Isn't it great to have your blood pressure just pumping through the ceiling and your veins feel like they're going to pulsate and your head gets hot and you want to take all your clothes off because you're sweating all over the place because you're angry and you're about ready to bite someone's head off and your anxiety levels are heightened? Doesn't that just feel wonderful? Right? No. It's horrible, right? Does anybody here really enjoy being angry with other people? If you do, then that's right, be slow to speak. I don't need to say if you do. But anger leads us to death instead of to life. Anger is a very natural human response. Right? So we don't need to beat ourselves up over it when we experience anger. We're never going to get beyond that, right? It's not like you're going to naturally kick that in the butt and never deal with it again. It's a natural human response that we deal with. But just because it's a natural human response does not mean that it is life-giving. It is destructive. It is destructive to relationships around us, and it is destructive to our own souls and our own stability and our own mental well-being. Anger typically leads us to self-preservation and this is important too, anger leads us to self-preservation, wanting to control things ourselves, which is a lot of times why we get angry, because we feel out of control. We feel like somebody has attacked our integrity or our personhood or have invaded our space or has been unfair to us, right? It's all personhood, right? It's all self-preservation stuff, typically. Not all anger, right? There's a lot of justice, righteous anger out there about the self-preservation of other people, people that are being unjustly treated and cared for or taken care of. Yes, that's something else to be spoken of, but I'm talking very tangibly the natural, everyday anger that we all deal with, which happens most often, is self-preservation oriented. And when we deal with self-preservation anger, and we experience it, it moves us away from love and compassion. Right? I have a hard time finding people that are showing love and compassion while they are really, really angry at the same time. Right? And love and compassion are two key values in righteous living. James talks about it there. He says, human anger, in verse 20, does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And so we as people need to be quick to listen. We need to be slow to speak. We need to be slow to become angry, to experience life. This is tremendously challenging for us. But the good news in all this is that we can ask God for help. He can help us. And that's a blessed thing, to have the Spirit of God's help within us, to help us in these areas, which ultimately, and I want to clarify again, we don't say, this isn't saying, we're supposed to do these things in order to be, like, for God to be pleased with us, right? Or because God's looking to condemn us if we screw up here. God gives us instructions on how to live our lives, not so that we can check off boxes that we have achieved a certain status of morality in living. That's not the point. The point is that God cares for the person, cares for our souls, cares for our interior, individual, communal personhood with God. And when we operate in ways outside of this, we are in effect destroying the temple of the Holy Spirit. We're destroying ourselves from the inside out. We're not living in life, we are living in death. It's like the analogy of the dry bones, walking death. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a walking dead person. Not from the television show, not in real life, nothing. I want to be a living soul, right? I want to experience the life of God within me. James helps us get there. Be people that are quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And don't just try to accomplish it on your own. Don't just will yourself to do better. If you want to will yourself to do better, you may have success maybe the first 2 or 3 times you try it. What is necessary is something called transformation. And so our first prayer is, Jesus, would you continue to transform me from the inside out? Would you help me to be a person? Would you develop in me more of you, that I might be more quick to listen, more of a learner in the relationships around me, that I would be slow to speak and to show value to people that I come in contact with? And would you, as far as possible and as much as possible, would you remove anger from my response system? I know it's not going to happen, we're not going to be perfect this side of heaven, but you better believe the Holy Spirit will take a prayer request like that and do some pretty darn good work with you, right? And you'll find yourself in situations saying, wow, like 2 weeks ago, I would have been totally ticked off at that response, right? Or I would have flown off the handle with that. But there's some sort of sense of peace and contentment that is developing within me that I'm able to release that and let that go. Typically, that's found in that maintenance of that connection with the Spirit of God. The closer we stay connected to the Spirit of God, the closer we are connected to the Spirit of love. The closer we are connected to the Spirit of love, the more love becomes a natural byproduct of how we operate in our everyday living. If you want to love more, stay more connected to Jesus daily, and love will find a way. to manifest itself through you. Okay? All right, I'm done. So I didn't get through all three, which is cool because I already have a start for next Sunday's message. If you want to read ahead, the first part that I'll be covering next Sunday is James chapter 1, verses 21 to 25, which was actually the title of the sermon today, Listening and Doing. Didn't even get to it. So we'll be doing that next Sunday. So I want to encourage you to take a look at that. All right. Well, I have a couple of quick things to share with you before we let you go this morning. And the first, real quick, is just a reminder that the back-to-school backpacks are due today. If you've signed up to bring one and forgot it, then talk with Lindsay. Lindsay's over here to my left, and you can run home real quick and bring it or whatever, or work something out with her. But anyway, thank you so much to Lindsay and to Gail, who have done a great job of kind of collaborating and getting this thing worked out for us. And thank you so much for those who have contributed to the backpacks for this year. So thanks for that. And then I just wanted to also mention that tonight, I believe it's at 5:30, we're having our fellowship potluck extravaganza in the lobby. And so many of you have signed up that you're going to be a part of that, and you've signed up to bring things. I believe Latika and Tracy have been in contact with you in terms of things that you've signed up for and helping set up or tear down or clean up or bring this food or that food or whatever. So just a reminder that's happening tonight, and you're still welcome to come. If you haven't signed up and you'd like to come, I believe there's still a sign-up sheet in the lobby. Is that right, Latika? Latika's got it. So you can connect with Latika or just get it in the lobby and sign up if you want to come, and if you want to bring something last minute, that's okay. That'll work. So anyway, that's what's going on for tonight. Other than that, we will see you again next Sunday, if not before. And we will be in prayer for Jan tomorrow at, is it 7 is the surgery? Or 8? Between 7:30 and 8:30 is what they told you, which means it'll be at 10. Probably, right? We don't know, but we'll be praying all morning for Jan. And we will keep you posted on through the prayer chain in terms of as things are able to be shared, and let you know how things are going, so you know how things are going for Jan. Okay? Have a great rest of your Sunday. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye. And so you know how things are going for Jan. Okay? Have a great rest of your Sunday. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.